All right, guys, so this is the posture analysis where I'm going to go through the common issues and the ideals that we see in these postural analyses. So using this software, I'm going to go through this analysis for you guys. So in this standing posture, the ideals that we will want to see is relatively symmetrical at the shoulders and the hips. We want straight legs and feet that point directly forwards. Your index toe, your big toes pointing directly forwards is cool, right? When we relax and in the stance here, we want to be symmetrical. As you reach down for your toes, what we want to see is that the knees and the feet stay pointed relatively straight on as you reach down for the ground, right? If they turn way out to the side, then you know you are trouble, especially tightness in the outer quads and outer hamstrings. As you reach overhead, we want to see that your elbows are able to lock out and we are relatively symmetrical at the arms, okay? If you are right-handed, I'm right-handed, so I get compressed throughout the day over to the right. And you can actually see that here, my right arm is not reaching quite as high as my left. So this is supposed to be the ideal, but it just goes to show you I'm human too. I spend the day writing or doing something with one arm, and I've got corrective and decompression work to do after a day like that, right? When we squat down, we want to see that we're pretty relaxed and at ease down there. We don't want too much strain on the face. You know, as you squat down, we want to be relatively symmetrical with the knees and the toes. And your knees must point out as far as your toes do, okay? We don't want the knees pointing way outside the toes or the toes pointing way outside the knees. We want to be relatively symmetrical. Whatever your toes do, your knees must do. Whatever your knees do, your toes must do in a resting squat, right? It can be different if we've got an active squat, but a resting squat, toes and knees point out together. Okay, then from a side profile, we'll go with the standing position, all right? The hips must be nicely behind the rib cage, okay? So the hips must be just slightly behind you, okay? Now, the upper back should be relatively flat and we should have a curvature at the lower back, right? That's a bit excessive, but a nice sort of curve that goes back and into your hips, right? The hips will be right over the heels and the rib cage slightly in front of the hips. That would be ideal. Hands, if they are nicely at your sides or just in front of your midline, that is cool too. So the hands just in front of the midline or at your thighs is ideal. When you reach down for the toes, we want to see a hip angle that is able to close at least below 90 degrees. I would say 80 degrees is a bare minimum. And if you're below 80 degrees, it's not a huge problem, but we want to see that hip able to close. Touching your palms to the floor, not 100% necessary, not a bad person if you can't do that, but it really is, I would say, a standard for the ability to hinge and, you know, fold at your hips. Okay, a natural curvature in the back, nothing too excessive at the upper back, just a natural curvature of this upper back, a very slight bend in the knee. Okay, awesome. When we reach overhead, we want to see the shoulders able to completely open, right? And the hands behind the head and the hips behind the head as well. So we want to see the heels, the hips, and the hands pretty much over one another, and the head and the rib cage just slightly in front of them. Okay, awesome. As you squat down, we don't want this angle to close too much. You must be able to keep the shoulder angle relatively open and able to look directly upright with your chest upright and hips sinking down towards the heels. There will be a slight rounding of the lumbar as you have a resting squat, and that's just fine. Anything excessive is obviously not good. Right, so the common issues: toes that point way out to the side, asymmetries at the hips, hips that shift over to one side and you load over one leg more than the other, bend and asymmetry at the shoulders. Okay, when you reach overhead, one shoulder or elbow that doesn't open up can tell you about tightnesses in a certain shoulder or towards a certain side, especially if you're dominant towards one side, like I am actually through the right. Okay, when you squat down, you might not be able to hit depth, or your hips really shift over to one side, and you see the shoulders and the arms shift over to one side as well. Okay, maybe we see the heels lift up. Okay, then in the standing posture, the hips thrusting forward in front of the rib cage. This is very common to have the hips thrusting forward. If we have tightness in the hamstrings and the glutes, they thrust those hips forward. And then we get this rounding, especially of the upper back. And if we have a curvature of the lower back, it's put under serious load and pressure. But often we get a flattening out of the lower back, right? Because of a rounding of the upper back, sometimes the lower back flattens out. And the front side of the body is taking all this load, and compression is held through the front of your body, the chest, the pecs, right? Which is not good. We load forward and into the knee instead of back and into the glutes and the hips, right? So those are common issues that we see from a side profile. The other issue is the hips thrust forward underneath the rib cage, and even if we look straight and upright, we're just too compressed, too straight through that spine. And even though this looks like a straight upright posture, there's a lot of compression through the body. There's a very military, stiff, strict style that some people think might be good posture, and they might aim to have a posture like this, but this is not what we want, right? Hands often way in front of the body. That's a sign that we have tightness through the front side of the body. All right, when we reach down for the ground, a real rounding of the upper back and not a good close of the hips. The hips stay open about 90 degrees. So the back really has to do the work here, right? So we see that if the hips aren't able to close, the back is put under pressure. Okay, even if you can reach for the toes, we want to close at the hips, right? A bad sign for the forward fold as well would be just not being able to reach the ground either. Awesome. When we reach overhead, if the shoulders stay closed and aren't able to completely open 180 degrees, then we know that that is a sign of a lot of tightness in these muscles underneath the shoulders, especially the teres muscle. The lats are often very tight, and then the hips have to thrust forward when you reach overhead. Those are all signs of certain tightnesses in the lats. When we squat down, of course, a severe rounding of the back, that's a bad sign. The eyes look downwards, the shoulders are closed and aren't able to reach overhead much at all, right? So those are all signs of imbalances and tightnesses. All right, the other one is, of course, the heels lifting up and loading up and into the quads for you to reach overhead. That's a common imbalance that we see, right? We aren't able to keep the heels down. All right, guys, so those are the common imbalances that we see in the postural test. This is a very insightful test for a lot of people and gives them real insight as to what's going on in their body. So take these videos, these posture tests, you're going to save them for yourself, and you can use this common issues and ideals to take your video that you've recorded and compare against the ideals that I talk about and the compensations. And you can chat in the community here in the Skool community and say, hey Brian, I've got these compensations, my hips are shifting over to the left, and send a screenshot of your analyses and we can still get back to you. But if you're an ex-athlete, someone who really needs some one-on-one support, remember, you're going to save these videos to send through to me and my team for an analysis that we will do together. So save these videos, take them, they are very important. Just get an indication of where you're at. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like you saw, guys, I was compressed over to the right, and this gave me the insight like, hey, Brian, you need to get aware that you are compressing over to your dominant hand, and you need to do that decompressive work. So it is a good thing to identify issues. It is not a bad thing. Love it, guys. That is your postural analysis.